Hi, very glad to see you on the channel. Before you start listening to the story, write in the comments whether you like the voice on the video. I never imagined that my quiet life as a devoted husband and stay-at-home father could be filled with such silent pain. Every morning, I wake up hopeful that today might be different, but each day I face the same subtle, unyielding cruelty. My wife, once the center of my admiration, has slowly transformed into the source of my deepest emotional wounds. Her words, though often spoken in a soft tone, cut sharper than any physical blow. At breakfast, as I arranged my kids' lunches, she casually remarked, "Is that the best you can do? You never manage anything properly." I felt my heart sink. The other day at the grocery store, I overheard her laughing with a friend about my clumsiness in a tone that made me shrink inside. Her words reverberated in my mind, a constant reminder of my perceived inadequacy. One chilly Saturday, we attended a family reunion at a large, bustling park. I was determined to put on a brave face, despite the gnawing anxiety that had been building up inside me. Surrounded by relatives and old friends, I tried to engage in light conversation with cousins and uncles, clinging to the hope that I was still worthy of respect. But as the afternoon wore on, my wife's behavior grew increasingly dismissive and cruel. During a casual group discussion near a picnic table, she leaned over and, in front of everyone, whispered loudly, "It's a wonder he can even tie his own shoes without messing up. What a burden he is." The words stung like 1,000 tiny needles, and I could feel the eyes of our family fix on me, full of pity and shock. I stood frozen, my mind racing. Should I finally speak up? I thought desperately, wrestling with the urge to defend my dignity against the rising tide of humiliation. I remember the bitter taste in my mouth as I forced a smile, nodding in silent submission while my inner world crumbled. The laughter and murmurs around me were not just sounds. They were echoes of my shattered self-worth. I watched my children, innocent and confused, as they exchanged worried glances. My heart broke seeing their pain mirrored in my own silent agony. That moment at the reunion was the tipping point. I realized that the abuse was no longer confined to whispered insults behind closed doors. It had invaded our family's public space. In that instant, a spark of defiance flickered inside me. Even though fear and self-doubt had been constant companions, I began questioning if enduring this pain was truly necessary. Was it worth sacrificing my own self-respect and the well-being of our family just to keep the peace? The weight of that thought lingered as the day drew to a close, leaving me to wonder if silence was indeed the only option, or if it was time to finally raise my voice. I thought I had seen the worst of it, but that night among close friends pushed me to the edge of what I could endure. We gathered at a friend's spacious home, the atmosphere filled with laughter and clinking glasses as old acquaintances reconnected. I had hoped to find solace in the familiarity of shared memories, yet I sensed a tension lurking beneath the surface that I could not shake off. Throughout the evening, my wife's smile never reached her eyes, and her remarks were laced with a sarcasm that cut deeper than any ordinary jest. The conversations flowed easily for most, but every so often, her words would target me. I sat quietly at the bar, nursing a drink and listening to her trivial observations, trying to convince myself that I was simply overreacting. At one point, as I attempted to join a discussion about an upcoming road trip, she interjected sharply, "Oh, come on. You know planning a trip isn't your strong suit. We wouldn't want you to get lost and turn our journey into a disaster, now would we?" Her tone was light, but the underlying implication was cruel, insinuating that I was incapable and hopelessly inept. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment as a few of our friends exchanged awkward glances. The laughter that followed wasn't warm or supportive. It was a cold ripple of shared disbelief at what they had just heard. My mind was swirling with hurt and anger, each taunt stirring a long-dormant rage. I had been the silent sufferer for so long that my soul was now screaming for an outlet, a moment to reclaim my dignity and break free from the chains of constant ridicule. The night's tension reached its peak when a mutual friend, in an attempt to lighten the mood, made an offhand comment. Maybe if you tried a bit harder, you wouldn't have to be so, well, bland all the time, he said with a smirk that was clearly directed at me. I clenched my fists under the table, feeling the weight of every disparaging remark accumulate until I could no longer hold back. In that charged moment, I stood abruptly, causing a hush to fall over the room as every eye turned toward me. "Enough," I said, my voice trembling yet resolute. "I have listened to these constant jabs and belittling remarks for far too long. I have sacrificed my pride and my peace for the sake of maintaining a fragile facade of normalcy, but I refuse to let my self-worth be defined by your shallow opinions." The room fell silent as my words reverberated through the air, each syllable marking a declaration of independence from the humiliation I had endured for years. My wife's eyes widened in shock, and for a brief second, even my friends looked unsettled by the raw honesty of my outburst. "I'm not your punchline," I continued, "and I deserve respect even if that means standing alone." In that moment, I felt a surge of clarity, a realization that my lifelong habit of swallowing my pain had twisted my sacrifices into a perpetual source of mockery. I saw the betrayal not only in the barbed words, but in every action that had led me to this point, and I wondered how many more nights I would let this cycle continue if I did not break free. The silence that followed was thick with the weight of unspoken truths, and as I slowly sank back into my seat, I understood that this was the boiling point, a moment of painful clarity that forced me to confront the reality of my situation. Would I continue to endure the pain silently, or was it finally time to claim my worth and rebuild the life I had so long neglected? I never thought that cleaning up our quiet home could turn into the unraveling of my deepest fears, but one ordinary afternoon changed everything. As I moved through the rooms, dusting off memories that had long been overshadowed by my own despair, I found myself drawn to a seldom-used corner in the study, a place my wife always insisted remained untouched. The room, filled with relics of our shared past, now held a secret that would shatter my already fragile reality. While straightening a cluttered shelf, I discovered a small, elegantly carved wooden box tucked behind an old portrait. Its polished surface glinted in the soft light, and I hesitated for a moment before lifting the lid. Inside lay a series of items I could hardly believe. A beautifully wrapped, expensive watch nestled among delicate pieces of jewelry, and an envelope filled with handwritten notes addressed not to me, but to someone else entirely. My heart pounded as I held the watch in trembling hands, its intricate design and undeniable value speaking volumes of a secret life I had never imagined existed within our marriage. For a long, agonizing moment, I sat in stunned silence, the quiet ticking of the house accentuating my rising panic. I tried to convince myself that there was a logical explanation, that perhaps it was a gift meant for a special occasion, a misunderstanding easily resolved. But deep within me, an unyielding sense of betrayal began to take root. My mind raced with disjointed thoughts, each more painful than the last. I replayed every dismissive remark, every moment of inexplicable distance between us, and now the evidence lay before me. The expensive gift was a stark reminder of promises made to someone else, and the carefully written notes hinted at secrets I was never meant to uncover. I felt a torrent of emotions crashing over me. Anger, humiliation, and a profound sense of grief. How could the person I had trusted the most use our shared life as a shield for her own deceit? My hand shook as I gently placed the items back into the box, my thoughts a swirling storm of disbelief. I began to wonder if every slight, every hurtful comment had been a calculated move to justify her betrayal. The realization hit me with the force of a tidal wave. The emotional abuse I had endured was not solely about controlling me, but perhaps a twisted attempt to validate her own infidelity. I whispered to myself, I must know the truth, but I won't act on impulse. With that, I resolved to gather every piece of evidence I could find, knowing that this discovery was only the beginning of a deeper investigation into the life she had kept hidden from me. Determination replaced the shock as I closed the box and secured it in a drawer, a silent promise to myself that I would not let her secrets continue to define my worth. The delicate balance of anger and sorrow pushed me to think methodically. I would need to collect more evidence, to piece together the fragments of a puzzle that had been scattered across our home for far too long. I felt both the heavy weight of betrayal and a spark of newfound resolve stirring within me. And with each passing moment, I understood that the path ahead was uncertain but necessary. As I resumed my cleaning, every familiar object seemed to carry the burden of our crumbling reality. Yet I moved forward with a cautious determination. I was no longer willing to remain passive, to let her calculated cruelty and hidden lies continue to erode the remnants of my self-respect. This discovery was the turning point, the moment when pain transformed into purpose. I knew I would need to tread carefully, gather indisputable proof, and confront the truth with unwavering resolve, even if it meant dismantling the life we had built together. The secret box had done more than expose an expensive gift. It had unveiled a hidden chapter of deceit, urging me to reclaim my narrative. In the days following my discovery, a cold determination settled over me like a heavy fog, pushing away the remnants of doubt that had once paralyzed my every thought. The secret box was now a symbol of betrayal, and I knew that silence was no longer an option. I began to meticulously plan a way to expose the truth, first by replacing the expensive gift with a convincing replica that would leave her none the wiser. Late one night, while the house was shrouded in darkness, I carefully unwrapped the original watch and examined every detail: the delicate engraving, the weight of the metal, the smooth curve of the dial. I then sourced a similar piece online, ensuring that every imperfection of the replica would match the original's elegance. My hands worked with both precision and trembling resolve, a silent vow to reclaim my dignity in every measured stroke. The act of substitution felt almost like a ritual, a necessary step to confirm that every piece of evidence could be traced back to her secret life, without her ever knowing that I was already one step ahead. Once the replacement was complete, I shifted my focus to gathering further evidence of her betrayal. I spent countless hours researching discreet methods of surveillance that would allow me to monitor her movements without raising suspicion. After weighing the pros and cons of various options, I decided on a small GPS tracker, hidden carefully in her car, a device that promised to map out her every destination with unerring accuracy. Every detail counts, I muttered to myself as I affixed the tracker in the inconspicuous space beneath the dashboard, my heart pounding with both anxiety and the thrill of defiance. The installation process was delicate and required me to work in near silence, as every sound in the house seemed magnified in that tense moment. I felt like a spy in my own life, orchestrating a plan that would eventually shatter the facade of normalcy that had masked my suffering for too long. Each night, I would return to the soft glow of my computer screen, cross-referencing locations with her known schedule, piecing together a puzzle that would reveal her secret rendezvous points. The digital map soon became a canvas of hidden truths, with red dots marking the routes that I once believed we had taken together. At times, doubt crept in. Am I doing the right thing? I whispered in the solitude of my study, feeling the weight of every decision. But the memory of every degrading remark, every moment of silent humiliation spurred me on. I reminded myself that I was no longer the passive bystander in my own life. I was taking control, reclaiming the narrative that had been forcefully written by someone I once loved. With each passing day, the plan grew more intricate. I learned how to retrieve and store data securely, encrypting files that now held the damning evidence of her deception. Late-night sessions became my new routine, the cold blue light of the screen mirroring the steely resolve that now burned within me. I even began rehearsing the confrontation in my mind, envisioning every possible reaction, every word that might be exchanged. The anticipation was a mix of anxiety and determination, fueling my every move with a precision that left no room for error. In the quiet moments before sleep, I could almost hear the whisper of justice, urging me to see this through to the end. This was no longer about revenge for its own sake. It was about finally liberating myself from the chains of silent torment. The meticulous planning, the calculated risk, and every small act of rebellion had built to a crescendo of undeniable resolve. I knew that soon the day would come when the evidence would be irrefutable, and when that moment arrived, I would be ready to confront the harsh truth with a calm that belied the turmoil beneath. The day I had dreaded and anticipated finally arrived, shrouded in a deceptive calm that belied the storm raging within me. I had tracked her every move with painstaking precision, and today's coordinates led me to a high-end restaurant in the heart of the city, a place where elegance and secrecy intertwined. I parked my car a discreet distance away and approached the restaurant with measured steps, each one echoing my resolve. The soft glow of chandeliers and the hushed murmur of well-dressed patrons created an atmosphere that felt both surreal and heavy with expectation. I knew that behind the polished facade, my wife was about to meet the man who had stolen pieces of our life together. I found a quiet table near the entrance, strategically placed so I could observe without drawing undue attention, and waited. As I scanned the room, my eyes locked on a familiar figure. Her, resplendent in a tailored dress, sitting with a man whose relaxed demeanor betrayed their shared intimacy. Their laughter, light and conspiratorial, confirmed every dark suspicion that had festered in my heart. I took a deep breath and decided that the time for quiet observation was over. Steeling myself, I strode over to their table. The conversation halted abruptly as I reached the table, and I could feel the collective weight of every hidden secret, every unspoken betrayal. I slid into the seat across from her, and for a moment there was silence, a pregnant pause filled with disbelief. "How long have you been lying to me?" I asked, my voice steady yet edged with the quiet intensity of years of suppressed pain. Her eyes widened, a mixture of shock and defiance battling within them, while the man fumbled for words, clearly unprepared for the intrusion. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, trying to regain control of a situation spiraling far beyond her carefully constructed narrative. I leaned forward, my gaze unwavering. "Don't quoi? I have seen the evidence, the hidden journeys, the secret rendezvous. Every location, every whispered promise has led me to this moment." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the nearby diners, but I pressed on, my words a scalpel dissecting the facade of our shared past. "I trusted you. I believed in us, and you used that trust as a shield for your betrayal. Every cruel word, every slight, was a calculated move to cover up the truth, and now the truth is laid bare before everyone." The man tried to interject, but I raised a hand, silencing him. "This isn't a moment for excuses. It's a moment for accountability." My wife's face flushed with a mix of anger and humiliation as I continued. "I have proof of your deception. I have tracked your every move, and now, in front of all these witnesses, there is no escape from the reality of what you've done." Her defiant expression faltered as the murmurs grew louder, and the restaurant's opulent calm transformed into a crucible of judgment. "Please, let's talk about this privately," she pleaded, her voice now a fragile whisper. "I'm done with private talks," I replied, each word deliberate. "This is a revelation, not a negotiation. I've lost my trust, my peace, and I refuse to be your scapegoat any longer." The silence that followed was profound, each second stretching into an eternity of shattered illusions and painful clarity. With a final look of resignation in her eyes, I rose from the table, leaving behind a scene of disarray and undeniable truth. As I walked out of the restaurant, the weight of the confrontation mingled with a bittersweet sense of liberation. I felt victorious, yet the victory was tempered by the deep, emotional toll of confronting a truth I had long tried to bury. Every step away from that place marked the end of an era defined by lies and a painful beginning of reclaiming my own story. Returning home after the confrontation at the restaurant was like stepping into a void of conflicting emotions. Every step I took toward the front door echoed with memories of betrayal and the weight of a truth that could no longer be ignored. The drive back had been silent and reflective, my mind replaying the raw confrontation and the shocking silence that had followed my declaration of truth. When I finally opened the door, the dim light of the living room offered no solace. Instead, it revealed the remnants of a shared life now marred by deception and heartbreak. I walked slowly into the room, each step heavy with the realization that everything was irreversibly changed. The air was thick with tension, and the familiar surroundings felt alien, as though the home we once nurtured had become a stage for our final act of discord. Moments later, the sound of hurried footsteps announced her arrival. She burst into the room, her eyes burning with fury and desperation, as if she were willing to do anything to reclaim control. "Where have you been?" she demanded, her voice sharp and laced with a mixture of panic and indignation. I stood silent, my expression resolute, knowing that this was the moment she would try to manipulate the narrative once more. "I needed some air, some space to think," I replied calmly, my tone betraying none of the inner turmoil that threatened to overwhelm me. She scoffed, circling me like a caged animal desperate for validation. "Space? You think walking out and acting all high and mighty is taking space? You're overreacting, as usual," she snapped, her words a desperate attempt to downplay the enormity of what had transpired. The familiar tactics of blame and minimization surged forth, and I felt the old wounds try to reopen, threatening to drag me back into a vortex of self-doubt and regret. "You always do this," I said firmly, my voice gaining strength with each word. "Every time something goes wrong, you twist it around and make it seem like I'm the one who's at fault. I have seen your lies, I have seen your betrayal, and I refuse to be gaslighted into silence any longer." Her eyes flashed with anger as she retorted, "You think you're so righteous now, don't you? All this time, you've been the problem, the weak one who just couldn't stand up for himself." I took a steadying breath, allowing the truth of my conviction to wash over me. "No," I replied quietly. "I was weak because I believed you deserved my loyalty and my trust. But I was wrong. I deserve respect, and I deserve to live free of this constant manipulation." For a moment, the room was filled with the oppressive silence of unspoken truths, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator in the background. Then she launched into a barrage of accusations and pleas, desperately trying to reverse the roles. "You're leaving? You're really going to throw everything away just because of a misunderstanding? You've lost your mind," she cried, her voice trembling between anger and fear. I met her gaze steadily. "I'm not leaving because of a misunderstanding. I'm leaving because I can't continue living in a web of lies and abuse. I'm done sacrificing my peace, my dignity, and my future for someone who refuses to see the damage she's done." Her protests grew louder, but they only underscored the futility of her attempts to salvage what was already broken. In that moment, as I listened to her futile arguments, I felt an overwhelming surge of liberation. The years of self-doubt, of trying to justify her cruelty, had finally come to an end. I realized that true strength wasn't in clinging to a past filled with pain, but in the courage to embrace a future free from manipulation. "I'm not coming back to a home where I'm not valued," I said, my voice echoing with finality. "This is goodbye." With those words, I turned away, each step toward the door a decisive act of reclaiming my own worth and freedom. As I closed the door behind me, the sound resonated like a declaration of independence, a final break from a life defined by deception and emotional torment. The weight of the decision hung heavily over me as I stepped into the sterile conference room of a respected law firm, knowing that this would be the battleground where my shattered life would be pieced together with the undeniable force of truth. For weeks, I had gathered every scrap of evidence, from discrete screenshots of incriminating messages and emails to digital logs mapping out secret rendezvous that painted a damning picture of betrayal, and today I was determined to present it all with unyielding resolve. I sat across from my attorney, a composed and seasoned professional whose measured nods reassured me that every piece of evidence was crucial. "This is solid," he remarked quietly as he sifted through the documents, his eyes never wavering from the proof laid before him. Meanwhile, my wife was casting herself in the role of the innocent victim, twisting our shared past into a narrative where I was the aggressor. I recalled her tearful arrival at the firm just days ago, her voice trembling as she insisted, "He's making all these false accusations. I'm the one who has been struggling." Her words were rehearsed, designed to evoke sympathy, but I knew that the evidence in my hands would shatter that facade. The ensuing meetings with mediators and opposing counsel were a microcosm of the power struggle that had defined my recent life, a clash of narratives where every document and testimony was a weapon. In one particularly charged session, the opposing counsel slammed a folder on the table and demanded, "Can you explain this series of emails that clearly indicate secret rendezvous?" My attorney leaned forward, his tone even and resolute as he countered, "Your Honor, these emails leave no room for ambiguity. They provide a clear timeline and confirm that the defendant engaged in repeated, deliberate acts of deception." The courtroom, filled with murmurs and stares from those present, became a stage for the slow unraveling of a carefully constructed lie. I listened, heart pounding, as each word further dismantled the narrative my wife had so desperately tried to maintain. Every cross-examination, every pointed question brought me closer to reclaiming not just my dignity, but the truth that had been obscured for far too long. The tension in the room was palpable, yet beneath it all, a cautious optimism began to bloom, a realization that for the first time in years, I was in control of my own story. As the legal process advanced, the courtroom transformed from a space of silent judgment into one where justice was being methodically pursued. I spent hours with my attorney after each session, meticulously reviewing every detail, ensuring that nothing could be twisted or misrepresented. There were moments when doubt crept in, when the sheer scale of betrayal and the complexity of the legal battle threatened to overwhelm me. But every time that doubt surfaced, I reminded myself of the countless nights spent in anguish, of the personal sacrifices I had made, and of the promise I had made to reclaim my self-worth. Walking out of the courthouse after a long day, I felt a mixture of relief and determination. The legal battle was only just beginning, yet I was already emboldened by the knowledge that the truth was on my side. I could sense that each submitted document, every testimony, was not merely an assault on the false narrative, but a step toward a future where I would no longer be defined by the shadows of betrayal. The journey ahead was daunting, and I knew that the road to complete vindication would be long and arduous. But as I glanced at the fading sunlight on the steps, I embraced the silent promise that justice, however slow, would ultimately prevail. In the weeks following the legal battles and emotional farewells, I found myself stepping into a life that was both unfamiliar and filled with promise. I moved into a modest apartment in a quiet neighborhood where the hum of city life softened into the gentle murmur of everyday living, and every morning brought with it the chance to rediscover who I truly was. The walls of my new home, though bare at first, slowly transformed into a canvas where I painted my hopes and aspirations with each thoughtful purchase and personal touch. I began reconnecting with my career, re-engaging with a professional world that had always been a part of my identity, yet now seemed like a realm where my potential was limitless. I threw myself into work with a renewed vigor, finding solace in the sense of accomplishment that came from creating and contributing, rather than being mired in the guilt and betrayal of the past. Amid these efforts, I rediscovered the simple joys of fatherhood, a term that once felt like a weight on my shoulders, but now became a treasured source of happiness. I took long walks with my children, listened intently to their stories, and reveled in the innocence of their laughter. There was a healing magic in the quiet moments shared over a game of catch in the park or a late-night conversation about dreams and fears. I began to see my role not as a caretaker of a broken household, but as a pillar of strength and inspiration for those who looked up to me. Every decision I made, every step forward, felt like a reclaiming of a part of myself that had long been suppressed under layers of hurt and regret. At work, I embraced challenges with a clarity that had been absent in the days when my life was dominated by conflict. Meetings were no longer battlegrounds for buried resentments, but opportunities to assert my skills and ideas. My colleagues started to notice a transformation, commenting on my newfound confidence and the calm determination that now defined my interactions. "I never knew you had it in you," a coworker remarked one afternoon, and I simply smiled, knowing that my journey was more about self-discovery than validation from others. Even as I flourished, I couldn't help but notice the ripple effects of my separation on my ex-wife's life. Rumors and whispers followed her in professional circles, and I learned that the consequences of her actions were beginning to surface. It was as if the facade she had so meticulously built was finally crumbling, leaving her isolated and struggling to hold onto the remnants of her former self. Yet, my thoughts never strayed into spite or resentment. Instead, I felt a quiet satisfaction that justice, in its own time, was serving its purpose. I realized that her downfall was not a victory over her, but rather a necessary step toward my own liberation. One chilly evening, as I prepared dinner in my small but inviting kitchen, my daughter ran in with a beaming smile. "Dad, can we go to the park tomorrow?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with hope and innocence. I paused, the aroma of herbs and simmering vegetables mingling with the scent of fresh beginnings, and I replied, "Of course, sweetheart. Tomorrow will be a new day." In that moment, I understood that rebuilding my life meant more than mending a broken heart. It was about forging a future where I could be present, joyful, and free from the shadows of the past. Each act of kindness toward myself, each step taken toward a brighter horizon, reaffirmed that leaving had been the best decision I ever made. I had learned that the journey to healing is not a straight line, but a winding road filled with small victories, quiet moments of introspection, and the relentless pursuit of personal truth. Every day, I woke up determined to move forward, leaving behind the toxicity of what once was and embracing a future where I was the author of my own story, unburdened by the weight of betrayal and regret. The day I finally witnessed the full circle of karma was both unexpected and inevitable. As I settled into a routine that balanced hard-won professional success with newfound personal peace, I began to notice that my ex-wife's world was crumbling around her. It started subtly, a missed deadline here, a miscommunication there, but soon enough, the careful facade she had built began to show its fractures. Her lover, once her partner in secrecy and indulgence, grew distant, leaving her to face the harsh reality of single parenthood without the support system that once made her feel invincible. I recall overhearing a conversation at a networking event where one of her former colleagues remarked, "I heard her projects are falling apart. No one wants to work with someone whose personal life is such a mess." Those words stung, not out of spite, but because they underscored the truth that the support she once took for granted was now a luxury she could no longer afford. Meanwhile, I was steadily piecing together a life that I had always envisioned but never truly believed was attainable. My efforts at work were rewarded with financial stability and opportunities that let me channel my creativity and leadership into ventures that mattered. I started receiving recognition for my contributions, and the professional world that had once seemed so distant began to embrace me with open arms. During one particularly reflective evening, I sat alone in my modest yet welcoming apartment, listening to the soft hum of the city outside my window. I found myself revisiting memories of a time when revenge seemed like the only viable option, a time when each moment of humiliation and betrayal fueled a burning desire to see her suffer. But as the days turned into months, I realized that my life was blossoming in ways that mere vengeance could never compare to. I no longer felt the heavy chains of resentment holding me back. Instead, I discovered a freedom that came from forgiving not for her sake, but for my own. I whispered quietly to the darkness, "I don't need revenge anymore. My life is better without you." That simple acknowledgement marked the turning point of my journey, A moment when I embraced the truth that justice is not found in hurting someone else, but in healing oneself. One afternoon, as I walked through a bustling park with my children, I encountered a stranger who smiled warmly at us and said, "You seem happy. It's nice to see someone enjoying life after hardship." His words resonated deeply within me, affirming that the pain of the past was finally behind me. While I occasionally caught glimpses of her in the media, reports of failed business ventures, public apologies that lacked sincerity, and a once commanding presence reduced to whispers of regret, I felt no vindictiveness. Instead, I felt a calm certainty that her downfall was merely the natural consequence of her choices. One evening, while reviewing some documents at work, a colleague remarked, "You've really turned things around. It must be great to finally leave that chapter behind." I smiled, replying, "I realized that holding on to anger was like drinking poison. Now, every day is a chance to start fresh." In that quiet moment of reflection, I acknowledged that true justice was not about seeing her suffer. It was about reclaiming my own worth and forging a future free from the toxicity that once defined my existence. As I looked back on the turbulent journey that had led me here, I recognized that my transformation was complete. My heart, once burdened with betrayal, was now open to the possibility of genuine happiness, and in that transformation lay the ultimate justice. The realization that I had become whole long before she was forced to confront the reality of her own choices. Thank you for listening to the end. I hope you enjoyed it very much. Don't forget to give a like, and tell us in the comments what you would do in such a situation.